Hello there, base campers. Thank you. If you've just stuck around, there's a few familiar faces that have stuck around for the last talk, so thank you for staying. Power is appreciated. If you've just come to join us, then you are in for a treat. I'm joined here by Alex Hibbert, who you may have already had the pleasure of bumping into round on the lead lenser stand. And Alex here has been developing expedition projects in kind of polar regions, really specialising in polar winter in particular and low light for over 10 years now. Yeah, and just to give you some stats to set the scene with this chap, we've racked up 500 days, probably more, in the cold so far. 20 days of which have been on unsupported expeditions of some description. So actually, you're probably just sweating sitting here on the stage.
Yeah, I'm not really designed for the heat, but I guess we're okay today. I'm not really designed for the rain either, but we'll survive.
So I think the first thing that jumped out of me, more out of jealousy than anything else, was that you described this as your full-time job. So I think I'm just going to ask the question on a lot of people's lips when we hear from expeditioners, is how do you make a full-time living out of something that we know to be hugely costly?
That's right. Well, polar travel is always going to be on the upper end of the sort of the money bracket when it comes to outdoor adventure. Sadly, we have to spend a bit more money getting to the places where we can launch our expeditions. And financially it works in a tricky way, because the money that we have to raise to launch expeditions is separate from the money that we get to raise for ourselves to pay the mortgage, put fuel in the car and so on. And what we try and do, people tend to have different methods to make a living out of being in the outdoors. Maybe you become a professional guide, or maybe you work just on the technical side with clothing companies to develop new sorts of gear, or you work with torch companies to develop better torches. If you're very lucky, you get to also make a living from speaking, from writing, from broadcasting in some sense. So most people who manage it full time do manage to do it by having at least one of those different components in place. I'm lucky that I have a combination of writing books, completely coincidentally sat next to me there, of speaking to different sorts of audiences. During lockdown I was able to build up something of a successful YouTube channel, and I do work with companies to help them develop their kit to hopefully a level better than it was when I first started.
You're well placed to seriously test them to the limits, right?
That's right.
Yes. So was this kind of urge to visit the very ends of the earth, was that kind of always brewing from a fairly young age?
Yes, I always knew that I wanted to go somewhere remote, somewhere unusual. And I knew I was never going to be very well suited to the deserts or the jungles. I wasn't a fighter pilot, so I couldn't be an astronaut. And so I had to focus in on one thing that I could do very well. And it turns out that walking in a straight line across snowy bits of the world I was reasonably good at. And so that's where I really got my focus. And I decided I didn't want to be a sort of a generalist adventurer, because I feel that sometimes you're at risk of not being particularly good at any of the different bits of adventure that you do. And so I decided I wanted to become a specialist in the polar world. And as linking onto that previous question, it is one of the most expensive ways of doing it. But it's something which I'm glad that I persevered at, because particularly in the early years, when you don't really have much in the way of reputation, you don't have maybe so much support financially, it's easy to say, you know what, this is a bit tough, I might go and get a real job. But I'm thankful that I persevered.
So you set off at university at Oxford, and that was doing biological sciences. And part of that university experience, you did get quite heavily involved in the exploration club as part of that. But actually it was leaving university that Alex here decided, well, I'm going to try my hand at this expedition malarkey. And you didn't go in tentatively, you went in with the big guns. What did you set out on as your first postgraduate expedition, Alex?
That's right. So university is all well and good. I enjoyed my biology degree, although biology is quite a broad subject where I studied it, and so I was able to focus on the behaviour of large animals with large teeth, and so at least it wasn't necessarily just staring down microscopes all day. So yeah, biology. But when I was at uni, it was when I was actually planning and putting together the idea for my first big expedition, and that became the long haul expedition. And you're right, I didn't go and start with a small tentative trip somewhere. I thought, perhaps naively at the time, let's go for one of the big classic polar records, which is the unsupported distance record. It's daft, it's simply skiing in a straight line for as far as you possibly can manage without help from the outside world. I managed to find someone daft enough to come and do it with me, and I guess you could call it a post-university gap year, a reasonably expensive one. We managed to get some support from grants and some small companies, and got the budget to go up to the Greenland ice sheet, where we then skied for nearly 4 months in a straight line. Well, actually, it was all the way across from one side to the other of Greenland. We then turned around and did the whole thing all over again. It took us 70 days to get from the east to the west across a new route, and then we skied at hopefully a little bit more pace on the return journey because we had lightened our sledges, we could move a little bit faster. So yeah, 113 days, George and I managed on the ice without any form of support from the outside world. We didn't argue once along the way, which I think was probably more of an achievement than the skiing. But yeah, that was the one that gave me the springboard to do this for a living. Now, if that had gone badly, if we had either given up after a week, decided it wasn't for us, or something had gone really badly wrong, then I might have knocked the idea on the head. But then it gave me the not necessarily the reputation yet, but at least the foothold in the adventure world to start writing and start communicating about what it is that I do.
And that then formed the long haul book that I think has just plonked off
the one that's fallen on the ground, yeah.
And so what's kind of been a common thread through your expeditions is that it's not just about the actual endeavour themselves, but actually the real joy that you have of sharing those stories afterwards. Now, I know the list is extensive, to say the least, but since that very first, just minor world record that you happened to crack on with, where have your expeditions taken you since then?
Well, I've tried to get to as many parts of the Arctic as I possibly can. Very, very long story short, my first journey was supposed to be down south in the Antarctic. We raised all the money for it, and then it was, let's say, taken away from us at the last moment. And so I then, almost by accident, did my first long journey in the Arctic and fell in love with the place. It's also, I don't want to be rude about the Antarctic, but it's a great deal more varied that you get down south. I think there's a lot, well, obviously there is culture there. There is no natural original culture down in the Antarctic. And so there's actually a human story to the far north that you don't get in the far south. I've managed to travel across the majority of the, let's say, the land bit of the Arctic, with the exception of obviously parts of Russia where you can't really get access to. And I've been up in cold parts of the world for pretty much every winter and spring season since I was in my early 20s. I don't want to be that guy who goes and does one trip and then just talks about it for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I genuinely love being out there on the ice. So even if I'm self-funding, then I will head out and do something, whether it's big, whether it's small. And it just keeps your skills sharp. So be that Svalbard, different parts of Arctic Greenland, Arctic Scandinavia, the northern high Arctic of Canada, northern Alaska, which was where I was for the last 2 winter seasons. Trying to do things that haven't been done before. I don't like to copy trips that have been done. And then the overriding thread of my next, well, it was supposed to be my last 5-10 years, but it's probably going to be the thread of my next 10 years, is this concept that I came up with around 2011, 2012, called the Dark Ice Project. And that is trying to get a group of human beings from land to the North Pole in full winter conditions, so that is in the pitch black, and trying to do it without outside assistance and without resupplies. Now, there's a bit of a controversy about whether that has been achieved before. I don't think it has in classic style, and so I think it's still there on the table for someone to get. And I've been given opportunities to actually do some guiding up on the Arctic Ocean around the North Pole, where I could actually make money to go there. And I've turned that down because the first time I stand there, I want it to be at the end of this huge mammoth project, which has now had 2 false starts. But I need to make it work out long term.
And also it needs to be you that does it before someone else. So you mentioned then about having 2 false starts. I mean, the very nature of the environments that you're going to, the time of year that you're choosing to go there, it's inevitable that you're going to get scuppered by the weather at some point or some other form of logistics. But what I really loved about reading about Alex's exploits is that actually at no point did you say, well, maybe if I just reach not as far and be a little bit less ambitious, maybe one of them will actually come to fruition. really stuck to your guns and you were just like, no, I'm not dropping my standards just to get a better success rate, you put it, which I thought was really, really, just dedicated to the cause.
You can get in trouble sometimes for going on and on and on at the same project because people go, well, is this going to work? Is it feasible? And I think there was a temptation once or twice to go for slightly lower hanging fruit. But I'm not trying to recreate what people have done before, and I firmly believe that if you are flexible in terms of how you come up with the projects, how you work with different equipment, different teammates, different strategies, there will be a way through in the end. And yes, it puts you at risk of failing sometimes. In fact, I wrote an entire book called Maybe, which sold very, very badly, about expeditions that go wrong, because so often people either pretend they never happened because it's embarrassing, or they just sort of gloss over as if it was a success when it very clearly wasn't. And I think actually it's better to be honest with ourselves. If you're going for the really big prizes, sometimes they won't go as well to plan as you would have hoped.
And I think what's even more kind of a testament to your flexibility that you just kind of hinted at is that when things have gone slightly awry, you've actually turned those, we'll call them failures, but into a real positive. And one of the huge ones that kind of came out of that was it a Greenland trip that didn't come to fruition? And then you actually ended up living for almost 6 months with a kind of an Inuit community, and just, really turned the fact that the trip hadn't come about on its head, and that ended up being a real highlight for you. Yeah,
that was really the first iteration of the Dark Ice project. That was the first journey that when we gave it a real go, heading up from a small community called Qaanaaq on the northwest coast of Greenland, aiming to get up onto the Arctic Ocean and then making that winter route to the pole. The ice didn't play ball. A lot of the ice where we were supposed to be travelling through broke up at the wrong time. And we had the opportunity, I suppose, to go, oh, the Arctic's not playing ball this year. We can just go home and feel sorry for ourselves and sulk. But instead we decided, no, hold on, we're fit and we're healthy, we've got all of this brilliant equipment with us. Why can't, and also we don't have any work on for the next few months. Why don't we try and make something of this? And we asked permission of the local community to stay. I mean, you can't just stay without the blessing of those that live there full time. And they were very generous. They said, look, there are plenty of spare houses. Generally in Greenland, people are starting to move south, and so you do get a lot of spare houses just sat there empty. And so we ended up with a little home, and we managed to buy 20 sled dogs. Now, we were polar skiers, we weren't polar dog drivers. And so we were basically going from being pretty damn good at what we did for a living to being complete beginners again. And that was remarkable because by just watching the skill and the tiny little nuances of how the locals went about their daily travels with the dogs, whether it's going to the next village to see their family or going fishing or hunting, we were able to simply pick up skills as we went along. And by the end of it, we weren't hopeless. We were able to actually travel, hundreds of miles under our own steam, or rather under the steam of the wonderful, wonderful dogs that became sort of part of our family. So yeah, it was an expedition that lasted longer than the original one was supposed to, the whole winter, the whole spring and part of the summer, and it was totally unplanned. We had no idea really where we were trying to get to. We were just immersing ourselves in that environment, and the four of us did not regret a single moment of that sort of plan B. It was something which so easily could have become such a sad end to the main expedition, which instead turned into its own creature altogether.
Something that I'm definitely taking from the images that are kind of looping around in the background of Alex's talk here is that often when you see those kind of images, low light, that cold, you kind of think, oh, they'll be hoping for the time when that changes, when the sun comes up, when things warm up a little bit more. What is it about these conditions that appeal to you so much? And I suppose second part of the question, also why unsupported as well?
Why the winter? When you're actually there, it's a very good question that you ask yourself a lot, because you see all these other adventurers and explorers and so on, enjoying beautiful sunlight and all these gorgeous sunsets and sunrises and so on. And we've instead put ourselves in perpetual darkness, or at least it feels perpetual. I think originally my motivation to be a winter specialist was actually pure competition. It was an opportunity to add another difficulty to what we were doing to set ourselves apart, because it is, let's face it, in a lot of cases, quite a competitive environment. And so that was really the motivation originally. But then I'm not saying that I absolutely adore only being able to see as far as my lead lenser can shine, but as the winter starts to ebb away and you get a bit of a soft glow on the horizon, there's nothing quite like that. It's sort of it's a manifestation of hope, the fact that the sun will come back at some point, and it's also just a privilege to be in a part of the world in that sort of surreal place where most people, even adventurous people, don't see. You know, if you're talking about remote parts of Greenland, well outside of the sort of the tourist traps, then people are normally there for the sensible bit of the year, the springtime, maybe part of the summer, probably not the autumn because that's when it gets stormy. But no one's there in the winter, and so it's a privilege to be there then.
So then the second part there, unsupported. I mean, I can see the appeal. You've already mentioned words like pure and classic style and things like that. But what is, the appeal of being out there and really going it alone?
The unsupported thing started right from the word go. When I decided I was going to go to the Arctic. Now, unsupported will mean all sorts of things to different people, and it has become reasonably controversial and almost political within the adventure realm as to what is and what isn't unsupported. People might say if you're wearing, you know, top quality equipment and you've got GPS and you have a satellite phone or an EPIRB, then how on earth can you call yourself unsupported? That's a debate for another day. But for me, it was the fact that I was taking what we have almost taking for granted today, good gear and good equipment, but saying, I'm not going to go too far. I'm not going to cheat or take shortcuts, because you could just get a helicopter charter and fly to the North Pole. People do that, not every year, but until recently that was a relatively common thing for extremely rich people, just to fly to the North Pole, have a glass of champagne and say well done to yourself. That was never really going to be exciting for me, even from the word go. So yes, I started off as a purist. I've probably become less of an ultra purist since. I've developed a little bit more softness in my policies since. But I still try and have that thread running through all of my journeys, that the hard work is being done by my teammates and me, because that means that when we get home and we're sat in the pub and we're saying, you know, what was that all about, we can feel that we've really done something, as opposed to have something done for us.
And you mentioned how integral to it kit is obviously going to be in order to keep you safe in these environments. But what I was kind of curious about is you must have experienced, depending on different weather systems and things like that, different levels of what we'd refer to as cold. And how does that actually then affect how you behave in those environments? Like, are there kind of different things that you might do at different temperatures?
That's right. So if you're talking about really cold temperatures, if you've got good clothing that breathes properly and allows you to not build up dampness and therefore get in real trouble, assuming you have the right equipment, assuming you're well fed and you're well watered, you then have gradations of discomfort, let's say, where you have to do different things. Generally, anything down to about minus 20 degrees is very comfortable. If you're approaching freezing, then of course dampness can become an issue, and you might then get sleet as opposed to snow. That's of course a problem. But when you're talking about comfort levels down to about minus 20 degrees, you really should be in kind of holiday mode. Down to minus 30, you have to start looking after yourself, thinking more about your extremities, and just keeping an eye on your teammates. If you have an exposed nose for more than too long, especially if it's windy, then you need to just check that your friend's nose isn't starting to lose its colour. Below minus 30, things get serious. Plastics start to behave weirdly. You don't want to touch bare metal, and your skills have to be very sharp. Below minus 40, and for the last 2 winters when I was in Arctic Alaska, we were traveling in routinely between minus 42 and minus 46 degrees centigrade, and all bets are off at that point. Daily mileages are no longer really the priority. Any miles achieved are a real triumph in those sorts of temperatures. It's about keeping yourself healthy. And on the winter before last, up on the North Slope, I clocked my coldest waking up temperature. Well, we normally play a bit of a game where we have a thermometer in the corner of the tent and we both guess how cold it is. And we woke up at 47 below. So putting the porridge on at 47 below is, even I wouldn't say that's fun.
And was there some kind of potential discrepancy there because it didn't go much lower than that? in terms of your thermometer?
The thermometer didn't have a minimum setting, so it could have got a bit colder than that during the night, but I'd rather not know.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned earlier that actually the idea of replicating other expeditions that have ventured into these environments doesn't appeal so much. But what you seem to kind of be finding, reading through some of your exploits so far and new things coming up, is that actually you kind of couldn't even if you wanted to, because these environments are so changeable, aren't they? And actually spaces where people might have set off from previously are now no longer accessible at those times of year. What kind of impact are you seeing of that change?
Yeah, the environment is changing dramatically. Now, what you think that we should do about that is another discussion altogether. But when it comes to the adventure world, in my little subgenre of adventure, I'm lucky because as a winter specialist, I'm normally there when the ice is thickening and not thinning and breaking up. So if I need to, if something changes over 10 or 15 years, I can simply shift my schedule forward a week, start a journey earlier, and it's not really going to bother me. So it's not really a great issue for me. It's an issue for the people who live there full time, and of course longer term for the impact that's going to have on the rest of us. Just one illustration, when I was living up in the far northwest of Greenland, the Inuit who I was living amongst, they used to be able to get on the ice to travel and to hunt using their dog teams from around October time, just one generation ago. So let's say in 1990 they were able to do that. And they were able to stay on the ice, on good quality ice, until about July. So their summers were very, very short. Now, and even in the years since I was there, they're now super lucky if they can get onto ice that isn't just going to fall apart on them by Christmas. They are now often off the ice by the end of April. That's just in one generation. So the sea ice is breaking up and it's not forming as fast as it used to that extreme extent. Now, I have done expeditions in the springtime too, and I guess one good example about how it would affect my plan for that if I was doing it today, the long haul journey, which was in 2008, which I used to think 2008 wasn't that long ago, but turns out it is. In 2008, that route, starting off in late winter and off the ice by mid-July, that was fine. We had a little bit of melt on the return journey, but you could skirt around it. That journey would now be entirely impossible, and that is not a full generation ago. That is what was that? Is that 15 years? That route you would probably now have to start in the winter time if you wanted to have any chance of being on the ice that long. And the Greenlandic government don't allow winter ice cap travel. So basically the long haul journey, not that I would want to repeat it, because I would never want to repeat my own journeys, is now impossible. That's kind of sad.
Sad, but also kind of means that you've really clinched the history books in terms of that one.
It's a niche of a sub-niche, but yes.
So, I mean, you are one of very, very few people heading out to these kinds of places. Have all of your expeditions always been kind of about athletic or prowess or achievements? Or have you ever been tempted to kind of combine them with obviously like research opportunities? There must be people biting your hands off to be like, oh, while you're out there, can you just look into this or gather a sample of this? Have you ever combined the two?
Yeah, my motivations have changed. When I was at university and I was very green to the whole world, yes, it was about ambition. It was about trying to go further, faster, better, new routes. That was the overriding initial aim behind the long haul, just try and do something that hasn't been done before. I'm now more proud because I'm aware that I can ski in a straight line for 113 days. I'm now more proud of the routine, of the skills, trying to sharpen even the tiny little subsets of your daily routine to become more comfortable than you would have been doing it a year before, to the extent where you might be able to catch an episode of something on your phone on Netflix or something after a long day of skiing, and that means you've got your skills pretty well sorted if you can manage that in the tent by the end of the day instead of being in survival mode the whole time. The next step beyond that, of course, is doing something bigger than the journey itself, and the answer is yes. The Dark Ice project, which was originally supposed to be simply the geographical journey, then in its second iteration, where we were working with companies in 2019, 2020, the beginning of 2020, had a whole science survey phase attached to the beginning of the expedition. So as well as the ski phase, which was going to be 6 to 8 weeks, we also had a 6-week science survey phase and also dropping buoys for various universities across the Arctic Ocean. And that was great because it added a whole new human story to what we were trying to do. Now, we had some fantastic support for that. We had Adidas and Gore-Tex on board, and they were phenomenal, up to the point where contracts were signed in February 2020, and we all know what happened then. So now we're on to sort of Dark Ice Mark III, when we can finally get all the support ready in time. It was such a shame because they put so much time and effort in. We were already 100 hours into filming the documentary, and then people have had worse 2020s, but yeah, that was rather sad.
So I think a lot of onlookers might possibly say that, by taking on adventures like this with so many different logistics, so many different moving parts, so many different things that could go wrong or things that are against you, are you just proactively making life more hectic, more complicated for yourself? But actually, there's a talk that's going to be following on from this where we hear from Steve, a Paralympian cyclist, and he describes it really differently. He describes that when we set ourselves with such a specific goal that we can be so focused on, actually the whole of life is simplified because all the noise of day to day just gets completely drowned out and you can just be laser focused on that one ambition. So how do you find it? Do you find that you feel like you've got a lot going on, or does it feel as though you've actually kind of streamlined things?
I think that's where it's quite nice that different personalities enjoy or are better suited to different things. I don't want to be, although I am a specialist in polar travel, and it's kind of going against what I said earlier about not wanting to be too broad, I don't want to laser focus too tightly on one way of making money out of it or one way of traveling. I quite enjoy stress. I quite enjoy having a full diary. I don't really know how to relax. And so my personality happens to suit running multiple businesses concurrently, trying to have different hats on different days. One day I'm my lawyer, the next day I'm my accountant, and the next day I'm my strategist. I quite like that. I can't imagine that mindset changing anytime soon, but I can certainly see why other people would want to make that world of theirs, even just for a short time, that bit smaller and that bit tighter so that they can get that bit perfect.
And you didn't add to the list of those different hats that you wear author as well, because writing a book can't be a particularly short undertaking. So when you do kind of come back, and obviously you've actually had a chance to process, and I'm sure you're probably making notes, whether it's mentally or physically, while you're out there, how important is it for you to be able to share in this kind of capacity what you've done, and also through your photography as well? Yeah.
I love having multiple ways of communicating what I do. So, now we have half an hour. Say if you're on YouTube, you might have an hour of your time to dedicate to watching what I'm up to. But then, of course, if you really, really want to get into the details, there's writing. And so I love the combination of short, medium, and long form communication. And yes, you're right. When you're writing, a lot of time goes into it, but it varies on the type of book. So the long haul is simply me telling a story of what happened. It's a chronological story. And that was actually reasonably quick to write. The experiences that I had up in northern Greenland with the dogs and so on, that required a great deal more research. In fact, my grasp of the local language, Inuktitut, which is the local dialect of the far north of Greenland, I think it was almost better after I came back, because I was doing much more reading. I was sending word lists up to my friends up there to check my spelling, sending them back again. And so that one took me nearly 4 years to get out there, because I was doing almost more research after I got back than simply telling that story. Although one of that years was arguing with publishers, but anyhow.
So depending on which hat you're wearing on which day, I think depends on maybe what the answer to this next question would be. But like you just said, you like to be busy, you like to have a full diary, and you've clearly just got a phenomenal amount of ambition. So what is the next thing looking like? Can you tell us? We won't hold you to it much.
Dark Ice will happen. Now, what format and what flavour that's going to be in, I need to work out. My team and I on Dark Ice Mark II, we had been working together at that point for 4 years. We decided at that point to take a breather because it was a lot of disappointment to handle, and we just thought, you know what, let's just take a breath and see how this COVID thing rides out. We didn't know how long it was going to go on for. We couldn't just say, well, let's just try again next year, because we didn't know if that was going to be possible. So Dark Ice is going to be ultimately my professional validation, should it happen when it happens. And I just need to make sure that it has the same spirit and the same high standards that it had when I first came up with the idea. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to do other things too. I want to do more broadcasts. I want to spend more time in North America, because it appears that North Americans quite like what I get up to. I'd like to actually almost go full circle and end up doing something down south. Now, the problem, of course, with the Antarctica, there may well be people who have travelled or have skied or climbed there. There's a lot more bureaucracy, and it's a monopoly commercially about who can and can't go, and you need to tick a lot of boxes and sign a lot of forms. So it may well be the bookend of my career where I decide to be not cheeky with the rules, but I might well sort of sit on the edge of what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Pull some strings. I mean, that is all the time that we've got at the moment, but Alex has a fantastic YouTube channel where you can kind of catch up on some of his, catch up on previous achievements to date, but also follow where his journey in these beautiful but brutal conditions take him next. There's also a lot of lifeboat chats on there too, which, I'll just leave that as a little
Alan the lifeboat has become my nemesis, yeah.
And then, of course, there's also the beautiful publications of The Long Haul and The Polar Eskimo, which is the latest one out, right? Can people grab a copy of those?
I do have a few copies, yes. So if anyone fancies the graffiti one, then, yeah.
Lovely. I think that it is very much a watch this space. I know you're going to do phenomenal things next, and I can't wait to follow that journey. So in the meantime, and I feel like a warm round of applause is what Alex really needs. So thank you very much for coming to share some of your tales with us.